Hello everybody, I'm going to introduce Sam Willetts to you. Last January, Linda Chase, Keith Lander and I went to the T.S. Eliot Prize readings, and there were lots of really interesting and good poets there, obviously, but the one that we wanted to come here to Manchester was Sam. We were really taken with his work. And the T.S. Eliot Prize was only one of many prizes that his book was shortlisted for, notably the Forward Prize, the Aldborough First Collection Prize, the London Festival Fringe, New Poetry Prize, and the Costa, and really deservedly, I think. It's quite interesting that we should have coincided with the Whitworth exhibition on the theme of darkness, as the book is called New Light for the Old Dark. And there are some poems describing a personal dark, but there are also many poems that are about light, and evocative poems about childhood, moving poems about family history, and poems which explore, I think, contemporary masculinity. There are men in lots of different situations, and I think that's really interesting. The language is extraordinary. I reread the book yesterday, sitting in the garage waiting for my car to be MOT'd, and the time passed really quickly just because of the absolutely extraordinary nature of the language that Sam uses. And the best poem about John Clare that I've ever read. And so it is a tremendous pleasure to have Sam Willetts with us this afternoon. Sam.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Elisa. I'm still very unused to doing this completely sober and straight, and I never knew what a nervous Nelly I am until I stopped taking things and drinking a lot. So I hope you'll bear with me if my voice wobbles a bit and stuff. Thank you, Elisa. And since I never know what I'm going to read before I read, but I like getting a request because it gives me a cue to read something. So I'm going to read the poem about John Clare, who was one of several so-called peasant poets who enjoyed a very brief vogue around the turn of the 18th and 19th centuries. And I think he was a really very remarkable poet. This is called Honest John. In confinement, imagined he was filling his pen from an inkwell of his own urine, saw the pale script fading as it dried to the invisible ink of his obscurity. Starving on the run, falls to his hands and knees like Nebuchadnezzar to eat grass, keeps walking back to what does not exist. Long dead first love, landscape of youth, back to days before the Sunday best of his brief celebrity. Thick-fingered daisy chainer, he knew once how to become very small, could enter the tiny world of a ladybird in a high wind, would read aloud the small names of God he saw written through the song-struck woods. Fugitive again, he knows the constellations and takes their giant word in laying himself head north, feet south, to know his way before first light, but first light sees him far down a wrong road, foul-mouthing the new land and sky as they spin him in their cockeyed compass, misleading him from his way home. So that was poor John Clare, who spent the last 40 years of his life in mental institutions, in asylums. I spent, I think it was 12 years as a heroin addict, and it was horrible. I haven't written that much about it, partly because when I was when I was doing it, I wasn't really in a state to write. But this is a poem about that. I called it Digging because digging is, you may or may not know, is a term for injecting. And when I first heard it, I thought, I was struck really by how horrible, what a horrible image it was. I didn't think at the time, and it only occurred to me quite recently, that it's the name of one of Seamus Heaney's most famous poems, one of the most celebrated poems in modern English poetry. But this is my digging. Some missionary girl reports that Chinese addicts say, your heart begs you to stay away, even while your legs are carrying you back. After the merry little jitter of the filter with the smack dancing in the spoon, after the absorbed, assassin-like, childlike procedure, citric, water, flame, I'm back in the basement, heart-sick, digging for a vein in February, as in a February gone and a February still to come, spitting prayers through the tourniquet between my teeth, licking up tears and pleading for my blood to plume up in the barrel. Please blossom up, squid ink, blood anemone in the works. Though you can have all that and miss or pull out and find you'd had a vein, now pissing blood. Dino's words as his grey fringe smeared across his forehead, as he missed and bled and raged to get it in. Blood, thank Christ. Spit out the tie, inject the welling gratitude that flushes pleasure through the grief, for the help and hope of friends sold out, for all her loving years, all of it driven down before one flood, one gut-bracing stealth of warmth. Ah, well, restorative as sunshine to a snake. So around the days and seasons the junkies go. You might as well accelerate us till our days and nights are strobing by. Use, cluck, raise, score, use, cluck, raise. A lantern show flicker of tail-chasing, nameless days spent waiting, fighting, struggling to outrun the burn and freeze, and maybe worse, the waking up to all that's lost, her happiness, her younger years, the child she might have had. So, digging. So, still a bit dark. This is actually another request, and I never refuse requests. It's probably one of my problems. This is called Nuremberg Notes. Excuse me. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, lurching 6'6" SS golem, curls fetal on his bunk, whimpering, please, I want my family. Ribbentrop tries to cop a madness plea. Torture me to death in expiation of our crimes. Don't overact, old boy. Julius Streicher, uncrowned king of Franconia, whip-toting, pelvic-thrusting loon, snubbed by the worst, rattlesnakes at the judges, Jew names, you're all Jews. In March, young Louisa Jodl, soon to be a gallows widow, sends her Generaloberst husband pink and white flocks with a note, darling, do not lose your temper with them. Outside, an unprecedented winter is surrendering its dead to the last field grey spring. The blinds are drawn for a 2-hour cine matinee, horrors seen nowhere before. Quote, Keitel bows his head. There are muted sobs in the court. Goering leans on his elbow, yawns. So that's actually, I wrote that after reading transcripts of the Nuremberg trials. Here's something a bit more lyrical, a bit nicer. This is about truanting, about playing truant, which I did so much. I remember my unfortunate dad saying to me once, I spend more time at that bloody school than you do, because he was constantly having to go in to sort of beg them not to expel me. This is called Truanting. Masculine, feminine, neuter. Beside boyish reaches of the Thames, I watched horses, companionable strangers to impatience, switch at summer, head to tail. By the Little Sister River, spring calves jostled, St. Francis'd me to keep on scratching the pink and humble itch between their ears. A pinched out cigarette stank in my palm while I sang Trouble in Mind to the Mule Canal. At night, I knew the lines shone like a river of rails under the sidings lights as the wake of a train broke gently through my bed. By day, the sleepers were steps laid flat to their vanishing point, each track a ladder back, A for away. Right, I'm going to try to recite one from memory now, this is a kind of rhyme it's about regret and the futility of regret. The futility of regret doesn't actually prevent me from indulging in it quite a lot, less than I used to, but I collected quite a few things to regret. It's called My Plans for the Past. I often regret the time that I've devoted to regret. Sustainably re-wasting wasted time and again. A psychiatrist once told me that I had Tourette's just because I told him that I sometimes curse aloud over old losses, shames, and failures, and the rest. Tourette my ass. I swear like that because it hurts. Because although I try my best, I've yet to find a way to fix the past, to saw sawdust, to put the smoke back into cigarettes. But I'm still trying. Okay, I'll get there eventually. I want to read one now, which is for and about someone I love very much. And it's a little true story. It's called, it's another one about addiction actually. It's called A Redbreast Flew into the Kitchen. I was fucked, living from hit to hit and floor to floor. The day after you'd traced me and come round shaking to say you'd met someone, were having his baby, and I mostly held it together until you'd left and your taxi had gone, and then I pushed shut the front door and howled like some animal. The day after, we'd held each other in tears to seal our breaking apart, and I knew you cared for me, but couldn't have me near your life. The next day, a redbreast, not any bird, but that bird, your private Dublin messenger bird flew into the kitchen where I was crashing, dipped in, perched at the table's edge, unpanicked, unruffled, clattered at no windows, just paused there, as bold as truth, and looked at me, looked for a few breaths, and flew clean out again. I sat electrified, my heart banging, nearly laughing at such a plain visitation. Any resemblance to living magic is purely coincidental, but thank you all the same. I think I'm going to do one more. I did have a list. Oh yeah, I want to read one for my dad because I read a couple that were about my mum. My dad died in 2005. I want to get something off my chest here. With the T.S. Eliot shortlisting, I was very excited because I was going to have a poem played on Radio 4, and I went and recorded it. It was very exciting. And so I was lying in bed. They were playing it on the Today programme, and I was told there could be 4 million people listening, so I was very excited. And I was lying, I'd recorded it, and I was lying in bed with my cup of tea, and it was played. And afterwards, I suppose it was John Humphreys, said, "Well, that was Sam Cheerful Willetts." So I thought, I won't actually tell you what I thought. But it wasn't. Yeah. So I should probably say that after the poem, but I think my dad would have laughed. And I also thought it was a bit rich, considering that they sit there and tell us about genocide and horrible rapes and all kinds of awfulness. And this is just a poem of love, really, for my dad, who died. So this is called Trick. The unexceptional mystery takes place. Around 11, love turns to matter. Dad dead. The ward grows and shrinks. Early spring breaking promises through the glass. Dad's untoothed mouth gawps, and its last O holds one darkness, dark of a worked-out, abandoned mine. His absence is brute absurdity, his hand soft as vellum. His new state exposes the stark child of him and unsuns me. No answers now to a son's questions about this, about the sense for all his slightness of a long life's mass coming to rest, a settling that churns up grief in a rounding cloud. Dad dead, end of the opaque trick that turns our gold to lead. I'm going to read a short one, and then I think I've got to go. Okay, yeah. This is a short, simple poem. I suppose it's addressed to myself as much as anyone else. It's called Garden. Look to your life. Rest your kindness and your unkindness now and listen. I know what makes your heart clench coldly in all weathers. I know how it feels that it always will. Bear that. Look to your life, to your one given garden. I can do another one. I haven't got many more, actually. I will do one more, if that's all right. Is that all right with everyone? I do another one? Okay. Yes, I was going to say, the musicians here, because I wanted to say thank you. No, they're not, but what lovely music. Some years ago, I went in an attempt to get clean, to get off drugs. I went to New Orleans for a while, which might have seemed a bit perverse. I thought, coming up here, I thought it's a bit like going to Manchester to get away from rain, but that's what I did, and I did actually. I had some clean times on there. One thing I did there, one reason I wanted to go there in particular was because I used to really love jazz, and the man who was credited with pretty much inventing jazz was called Buddy Bolden. And all the kind of early jazz greats acknowledged him as the daddy of it all, really. He never recorded anything, and he spent, like John Clare, he spent most of his life in an institution. But I love the fact that I think about 1910, his kind of theme tune, his theme song, was called Funky Butt. Okay, I think that's pretty good. It says a lot about Buddy Bolden. And he was buried in a pauper's grave in New Orleans, in a cemetery that has a lot of voodoo, real, not for tourists, actual, real voodoo graves and everything. Then he was dug up because he couldn't pay the rent. His friends couldn't or whatever pay the rent on his grave, and no one knows where he's buried now, but he's buried somewhere there. And I went there, and the place is called Holt Pauper's Cemetery in New Orleans. I thought I heard Buddy Bolden say, "Funky butt, take it away, let Mr. Bolden play." Far from the tourist honk, cut grass sweetens the mid-city heat. An old man called Mr. Davis, a black D-Day veteran, his eyes blue-clouded like an aged hound's, leans, hand on kidney, weeding righteous ground. A scrawl on one lopsided board says, "Forever sadly misted." Strange aerials, feathers, scraps of blue protect the voodoo graves, and some are furnished. A burst sofa, sodden chairs of ambiguous vacancy. In a corner of live oaks and Spanish moss, the John and Jane Does. Out of the river, off of the sidewalk, says Mr. Davis, sport their wildflower legacies, forgottenness perfected. Somewhere here, unmarked, lies Buddy Bolden, jazz inventor, evicted from his first grave, upkeep unmet. Beads glint in the trees, voodoo berries, wicked bright. Queen Victoria still reigned when King Bolden blew in Storyville and sent his gleaming signature clear across the Mississippi to Algiers. Mr. Davis straightens, dabs at sweat, works on, some blue reward already in his eyes. That's it, that's Buddy Bolden. Thank you. I've got one more very, very short one, which actually it started as a cartoon that I drew a few years ago. And it's called Softening the Blow. She said, "Look, it's not you, it's me. I don't like you."